Bum-ba-da-dum. Howdy, welcome to BanjoBenClark.com. I'm Banjo Ben, your host on the site that teaches you how to play banjo and guitar, but this week is Mandolin Week. Several years ago, I did a lesson called Exploring Mandolin Backup with Ballads, and I think we started out in the key of A. Maybe it was G, I can't remember. But anyway, it was really popular, so I've continued that series. So far, we've covered ballads in the key of A and G and E, and today is in the key of D, which is very, very useful and just a lot of fun. And I would say that I think some of the most beautiful mandolin playing happens at slower tempos. And so what we're going to do today with the key of D is we're first just going to start with a little bit of theory, talking about the most common chords in D and where we can find variations of those chords on our mandolin, particularly using the open strings, because that's what we really need to create some of these really pretty sounds. Then we're going to go into rolls. I want to teach you forward and backward rolls. I want to teach you how to incorporate the scale, how to syncopate that scale, and then ultimately we're going to look at some licks that are really, really pretty. If you're watching this somewhere besides the website, you can come over to the website, BanjoBenClark.com, join as a Gold Pick member, see this lesson and all the rest of the Exploring Mandolin Backup lessons and hundreds more. If you're watching here on the website already, don't forget to download the 2 tabs that I have for you and to also practice along with the rhythm track MP3s. Let's go. Let's start with just a little bit of theory. We're in the key of D today, and we're going to be dealing a lot with open strings because that's how we get a lot of those really pretty rolls. Okay, so we can, of course, do those with closed chords, but I want to concentrate on using the open strings right now. And we need to look at what's the most common chords that we're going to run into in the key of D. Most songs in the key of D are going to use at least these 3 chords, D, G, and A. Those are the 1, 4, and the 5. And there's also a lot of minor chords out there that may be used, or a couple minor chords that may be used. And a lot of these chord shapes are going to work over the minors too, so I encourage you to just explore that. But let's look really quickly at the notes of the D, G, and A chord and where we'd find them on our neck and maybe some variations for chord positions that we may use. First of all, let's look at the notes that are in a D major chord. So there's only 3 notes in a D major chord. You can go do my D major scale study lesson, but it's D, F sharp, and A. And whenever we find all of those notes, all of the Ds, all the As, all the F sharps on the mandolin neck, from say the 5th fret down to open, because that's where we're kind of operating today, you get what we have in measure 1, which is just a D major arpeggio. It sounds like this. So the lesson there is that if we make any kind of chord shape out of those notes, any combination we want, in measure 1, we come up with some variation, some voicing of a D chord. Here's one, measure 2. Maybe you know this one, just a open D chord. You'll notice that those are all of these notes are made up of notes that we see there in measure 1. Here's another one. We can just switch instead of that 2nd fret here, we could switch it out with the 5th fret. So that gives it a little different sound, doesn't it? And then here's a bunch of different ones in measure 3 because we don't always have to play 4 strings. In fact, so with some of my rolls that we're going to learn, they're 3-string rolls. So we need to know not only full 4-chord D voicings, but also how to get them out of 2 and 3 strings. Here's one, just the 2nd fret here, open 5th. That's the first one we see in measure 3. Another, another, and another. The point that I want you to see is that you need to know where all of these D major chord notes are, the D, F sharp, and the A, or at least have an idea of how to find them, because that's where we can get a bunch of our different shapes to play these rolls and patterns through to sound really good when a band is playing a D chord. That's why we're doing that. Now, when the band switches to a G chord, you kind of need to know the same thing for G, and that's what we see there in measure 4. Here's a G major arpeggio, all the notes in a G major chord from 5th fret down. Oh. And if we combine those in various variations, can I say that? Various variations. Here's what we have. Measure 5. You can play it like this. Play it like this. And you may be able to find even more. And that's great. And of course, if you moved up the neck, you'd be able to find lots more. But again, we're using the open strings. We're kind of hanging down close to the nut today and just finding our footing there. Now, what about an A chord? Oh, well, here's an A major arpeggio. Now I did use a 6th fret here because I wanted to grab that. We're going to actually use that one. You hear that with the iPhone ringtone. That's the chord shape that you hear there. And so we get that big open chord, measure 8. You can also bar those bottom 2 frets and get that. Or you can play some partial chords, measure 9, or like this. Okay, so all kinds of different variations there. And again, that's not exhaustive. That's just an example of some of the chord shapes that we're going to use to begin applying picking patterns to get these really pretty sounds. Speaking of that, let's take a look at forward and reverse rolls. For the sake of being able to cover as much as we can in one lesson, I'm going to keep the rolls down to a 3-string roll. Okay, kind of like a banjo player would do with thumb, index, middle, ba-da-ba-da-da-dum. Now, there's 4 strings or 4 sets of strings on mandolins, and we could, of course, do those kind of rolls too. Okay, and so you can take what you learned today and apply that to 4-string rolls. That's fine. Those are actually maybe a bit easier to fit into the measure because there's 4 notes in that roll, and that fits great into 4/4 songs. But we're going to do these 3-note rolls, and one of the other reasons why I'm going to do that, which again sound like this. One of the reasons why we're going to do that is because it gives it a particular sound of kind of falling forward in the timing. And to me, it's just really, really pretty. It's not as square. And it's also a little bit more difficult because it involves some alternate picking. So I wanted to introduce that to you. Okay, so in this particular progression that we're going to look at today, this is just a mock progression that is common amongst songs that are in the key of D. I'm going to give you 2 measures of D, 2 measures of G, 2 measures of A, back to 2 measures of D. And we're going to explore all kinds of different options over that chord progression. Look there at the first measure that we see there. I'm going to use this particular shape for a D chord. Now you may say, well, that's not a D chord. This is a D chord, or this is a D chord, right? Or this is a D chord. Well, those are all D chords. And one of the variations that we're going to get is this open D string, open A string, and then the 5th fret up there, which is an A note. And let's just practice doing our reverse roll. First, we're going to start with the root there, and we're going to do... That's what that first measure is. Now, I personally am going to encourage you to use true alternate picking. That means notes that fall on the downbeats on the 1, 2, 3, 4 are going to have downstrokes. Those notes that fall on the upbeats are going to have upstrokes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, of course, it makes it a bit difficult whenever you're doing a 3-note roll because we're having to go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. But it's worth the practice, and you need to be able to do that. And I have nothing against like a down, double up. Okay, but I just want you to stretch your skills and be able to do it both ways. Now, speaking of doing it both ways, let's switch to a forward roll in the next measure. So when we do those back to back, and this is more of an exercise than what you would actually play in the song, even though it sounds beautiful, those first 2 measures sound like this. Then forward. Pretty cool. Now let's do the same thing. Measure 5, the first G chord variation I'm going to do is just my index finger down, and I'm going to do the backward roll. Now I'm going to change that variation to this variation, maybe a G chord that you're more used to seeing in measure 6, and apply the forward roll to it. If you haven't noticed yet, this is an exercise to get you playing in the key of D and using a lot of the skills and developing the techniques while also being fun to do. So it's not like you're going to memorize this tab so that you can carry it and play it exactly like this over a song in D. It's just fun exercises. Okay, now next we have 2 measures of A. We're going to start with a backward roll using this shape. Just start index finger down on the 2nd fret. Leave that down, and then let's grab this shape that we showed earlier, the iPhone shape, and do a forward roll. And then back to a D shape, different than the first one. The first one we did the 5th fret. Let's do the 2nd fret now, and we'll do a backward roll. And then quickly switch down to another shape. It's just part of this D chord, right? Go down to the 2nd fret here and do a forward roll. Okay, so what we've done on purpose is we've moved through the D, G, and A chords, used a different variation of that chord shape with each measure while also switching between forward and backward rolls. That's developing a lot of skills, and it will come in handy in the future. Okay, so now that we have that down, or maybe you do, spend a little time with it, get that down. We're going to incorporate some D major scale notes into that as well, because honestly, it would get a little boring to just have rolls happening all the time. There are times when you'll do that more than others, but we need to start adding in some other notes, adding in some movement, take people places with us musically. So let's do that video next, where we add some scale notes and then eventually some syncopated scales and licks. If you're watching somewhere else beside the website, come on over. I've got 20 or 30 more minutes of teaching to do, plus the tabs and the MP3s. If y'all are watching on the site, just click on the next video segment.